What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Platform Fighter and Super Smash Brothers tutorial series, we're going to be going over a match and menu. Essentially what this means is we will be able to play our game and pop up a menu at the end that we can control, and specifically the menu at the end is either going to allow us to rematch or just return to the main menu. We'll actually cover those parts of it in a separate episode, probably the next episode that we have, but we want to set up the menu and the menu navigation today. The menu navigation will be supported on keyboard and gamepad. Of course, mouse will be included as well, but that's actually easier and we don't have to go over that today. We'll go over that in the next episode when we talk about confirming our selections. So I'm going to let the timer run out here so that our match will actually end, and then once it ends, we'll see the menu pop up. So just wait for the timed mode to reach 0. You could do this in the stock mode when all the stocks reach 0 as well, but we really only went over determining the winner in timed mode so far, so I'm sticking with that for now. Of course, we will update it later. So the time just ran out, and you can see that it says match over. We have rematch and main menu. Now, I did not make other assets for this, so it's really ugly right now, but we have rematch and main menu as different colored buttons. So the gray button is the one that we're currently selecting, and the red button is the one that we're not selecting. So when I press up, I go to rematch. When I press down, I go to main menu, and it's that simple. So before we get started in this episode, if you want to get caught up in the series, I'll link you to the entire playlist right here in the top right corner. You can check it out and see how we've done everything from our character select screen to our determining victory of matches. Alternatively, if you don't care about that, I'll go ahead and link you to this episode right here. This is where we determine the victor of the match, and we are going to be using that function to spawn this widget today. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be doing almost everything in the blueprints today because we're essentially just going to be creating a widget, and I'm going to handle the navigation in the widget today as well. I've shown you a few different ways of doing that, but in this series we haven't really done full menu navigation, so I'm going to show you a blueprint only navigation system that we can create and customize to our liking. The first thing we want to do is actually have a widget that we want to spawn, and to do that we can go to our blueprints and go to functional VPs, widgets, wherever you want to put your widget that you're creating. I have mine in the menus folder, and in here I went and hit add user interface. It's all the way at the bottom here, almost being cut off. Widget blueprint. Then I called that the match over menu. In here it's very simple. I have a canvas panel, which if you're in Unreal Engine 4, you will have one in your widget by default. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, you will not. You do not need one. It's just a container, and I do like using them. If you want to add one, you can simply search for canvas panel and drag it into the hierarchy, or find it under the panel section. Then I have the title, which I just called match over. This is just a text element. I've called it match over title text. You can look at my sizes. I typically anchor things to the top center if it's the title. I have size to content checked. My text says match over. Here's my font settings. You really don't need to copy any of this. You make it look how you want. This is just how I've done it. Then I have two buttons, just standard buttons. One is called the rematch button, and here are my settings for this. This is anchored to the top center again. I have a custom image that I call gray button. And I've made sure that the rematch button is a variable. That way we can actually use it. Now, the button has a text element on it as well, and that text just says rematch. Basically, it's the name of the button. So I have rematch button text. This one is not a variable. It says rematch. There's all my settings for it. Now I have another button. This one is called the main menu button, and it is also a variable. We're going to need it in the graph. This is also anchored to the top center, and then you can look at all my settings. I'm using a different image for this one. And there are all my settings. I have a text widget on this element as well that I call main menu button text. So there you go. And lastly, I've added a little background that is transparent, so I can see through it partially to the actual game in the background, but it also separates it and shows this is a menu. But I have an image, and I anchored it to the full size of the widget. Set the Z order to -1, so it appears behind everything else. Here are my colors, so it's just black with half alpha, 0.5. And there you go. This one is a variable as well, but it actually doesn't need to be, so I'll go ahead and take it away. And at this point, we can go into the graph. Now, it's actually very simple what we're going to do today. We're basically just going to have the ability to move selections, so we're going to move between buttons. So we need the ability to move our selection. We need to determine what controls are going to do that, and then we need to determine what happens when we actually move that selection. First things first, let's go ahead and set up our listen for input actions, or essentially let's determine what inputs are going to move our menu items up and down. So if we're on rematch and we want to scroll down the main menu, what button is going to be that down input? And conversely, if we want to go to the rematch button and we're on the main menu, what button is going to be responsible for the up input? And the first thing we'll need is that actual input. So if we go to edit project settings and look at our inputs, we may already have a value for this. I set it up during the character select screen keyboard mode episode. But if you don't, it's fine. Just have an input action set to menu up and menu down. This will work with enhanced input as well. If you have that system set up, just make new input action mappings for those. So you can do this by pressing the little plus button on the action mapping, typing in your name, and then pressing the plus button to add the actual input for the mapping. So I have W if we're on a keyboard, or gamepad left thumbstick up if we're on a gamepad. Menu down is S on a keyboard or gamepad left thumbstick down. Now we can go back to the graph, and the first thing we need is event construct. So essentially when the widget is created, event construct. You probably already have it in your graph here, but you can add it by typing it in like I did. Then we can call listen for input action. And you'll get this node right here. You have to type in the exact name of the input action we just went over. So I had menu underscore up. The other one was menu underscore down. The event type of press means this will happen when we press it. We could also do release, repeat, double click, or access, but press is really all we need. We don't need it to consume input, but that would be relevant if you wanted something to happen on this widget and not happen on other widgets when the same input was pressed. Certain widgets were listening to it at the same time. The callback we can drag off and type add custom event. And what we want to do is make an event off of this so that when the menu up input is pressed, this event gets called. And so that's what I've done for both of these. I've called one move up and move down. When we are moving up or moving down, we need to actually change the selection that we're at. And we won't be able to do that until we make this move selection function. But let's make two variables first. The first one is going to be current selection, and the other one is going to be max selections. So press the plus sign here, add a variable. Current selection is going to default to 0, and it is going to be the player's current selection. We're going to assume that the top is 0, and we are adding 1 to it every time we go down. So rematch is 0, main menu is index 1. The max selections is the max number of selections that we have on our menu. Essentially include the index 0 in this, so I have max selections as 1, which really means that we have two options to go between, 0 and 1. So this is really like the highest index that we have, the highest index that current selection can go to, and that would be 1. After making the variable, make sure to compile, that way you can set the default value. Now once that's done, we can go and make a new function right here, plus function, and I've called that move selection. Move selection has one input parameter called direction. It is also an integer, just like current selection and max selections. So direction is going to determine if we're moving up or down. A negative direction indicates that we're moving up, and a positive direction indicates that we are moving down. What we have to do is essentially a balance check. We need to make sure whatever direction we're trying to move is within the possibility of movement. So if we are on rematch and we press down, we can go to main menu. If we're on main menu and we press down, we can't go anywhere. Now, you could of course make it roll over and set it back to the top, but for today's episode, we're just going to say we can't go anywhere. Of course, if we're on rematch and we press up, we also can't go anywhere. So we need to check for both of these conditions. We need to take our current selection, add the direction to it, so either -1 or 1, and we need to make sure it is both less than or equal to the number of max selections, so it can't go above our max, and we have to make sure it's also greater than or equal to 0, or essentially our minimum. The result is less than or equal to the max selections, and this is and bool. The result is greater than or equal to 0. If both these conditions are true, then we can go and do more logic. If it's false, we just don't do anything at all. So if it's true, we want to set current selection equal to the result. So we added the direction to current selection right here, but this doesn't actually change the value of current selection. Now that we know we want to change the value, we can say set current selection, and we can pass in the result of the addition. Now that we have the new location, the new selection that the player is on, we have to update the buttons to represent that. That way the player knows what button they are focusing, and we can do that using a new function. So we're going to add another function here, and I'm going to call this determine selection. Once you've added this function, go ahead and call it right away so we don't forget. Determine selection, right after you set current selection. And you can do this by dragging it in or searching for it. At that point, our move selection is done. So let's go back to the event graph and let's call move selection as well. So I'm going to call it for move up and move down, and I'm just going to change the direction that I pass in. So for move up, I'm going to pass in -1. And for move down, I'm going to pass in +1. Just like you see here. Now let's go to our new function, determine selection. In determine selection, we essentially need to determine if the button that we are looking at is the current selection. If it is, make it a certain color, otherwise make it another color, or make it a certain style, right? Because we want to indicate to the player what button they're on. So remember, in my case, the gray button is the button they're on, and the red button is the button they're not on, or the buttons they're not on. Eventually, we'll have more than just rematch and main menu, so there's going to be plenty of red buttons and only one gray button. In determine selection, the first thing I do is make an array of all my buttons. Basically, I want to loop through all of them to check and set their style, and an easy way to do that is to make an array. So we can get them, this is why we need them as variables, get main menu button, get rematch button. We can drag off of them and type make array, and add a pin, and add all of our buttons to this array. Then we can drag off the array and get a for each loop, which means we will loop through all the buttons or all the elements in this array. And this is what you're seeing right here. For every item in this array, or essentially every item in this loop, we are going to want to check to see if it's the same element as our current selection. And to do that, we can simply drag off the array element and type equal, and then drag in the result of array get, a copy is fine. Then we want to pass in current selection, and then the result of the get can go into the other part of the equal. That's what we have going on here. What this is doing is getting the value or the button at the current selection index, which remember is the current selection on the menu that the player is at. So rematch would be 0, main menu is 1, and comparing it to the array element in the loop. Essentially, if the player is currently over the rematch button, and we're looping through the rematch button right now, current array element is the rematch button, this will evaluate to be true. However, if the player is currently on the rematch button and this array element that we're looping through is the main menu button, this will evaluate to false. So we want to bring the equal into a branch here. So equal branch. If it's true or if it's false, we're really going to do the same thing. We're just going to use a different image for the style. So essentially, I'm going to set the style of the button that we're looping through. So in the case of it being true, I'm using the result of the get and setting the style on it, but you could also use the array element. That doesn't hurt anything. And for the false case, I am using the array element. That one has to be the array element. Otherwise, you'll be setting the style for the wrong button. We have to drag off the button and say set style. We can use either or here. Sometimes I use one over the other. Here it really doesn't matter. So in my case, I did use the top one. And then I just right click and split the struct pin on the style. And then I right click the in style normal and split the struct pin. And this is going to be the variables for our style of our button normally. And we're not using the hovered, the pressed, the disabled right now, so normal is fine. The size can stay the same. The margin, the tint, the outline settings can stay the same. The main thing we need to change is the image. This is for the true. This is the one that we are on, so we want to use the selector to the hovered button. You can use your gray button hover or whatever you have in your case. And that's what I've done here, gray button hover. For the false, I'm using my array element and setting style, but I'm using the red button. That's determined selection for you. Now the other thing we have to do is go back to the event graph, and we want to call the move selection, or really the determined selection behavior right away, but I'm just calling move selection to kind of go through the whole process. The reason this is important is because current selection will be used, and we will update the menu to display the right images immediately. Technically, this doesn't need to happen because the designer view will display this, but if you're updating your widget here and you don't want it to match what the user is going to see, by default on the match over, simply calling move selection in the event construct will solve that for you. So in that case, the match over menu essentially becomes an updated version with all the information it has as soon as it opens up. So again, you just don't have to keep managing it and updating it whenever you want to change a certain style element about it. So I recommend doing it. Now at this point, that is our widget. There are two things that we want to do. They involve actually spawning this widget to the screen. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go into the code and specifically go into our SSB template game mode.h. I've added a new blueprint implementable event. You can see here, U function, blueprint implementable event, void, display match over menu. Essentially, we're making a function that we can call when the match is over and when we should display the menu. Quite simple. If we go back to the SSB template game mode.cpp and scroll down to our function determine winner, we can call it at the end of this function. So you see here, after everything is done, I have display match over menu, and I'm going to add a comment here. Display the match over widget upon completing determining the winner of the match. So we want to call the new function that we just made right here at the end of determine winner. And then I'm going to relaunch the editor. And once the editor is back open, we want to go to our game mode blueprint. So I have mine as base game mode BP. And I'm going to go to my event graph and I'm going to fill out this event that we just created. So it was event display match over menu. And when you type it in, you'll get this node right here. At this point, we want to go ahead and create our match over menu widget and add it to the viewport. So to do that, we can type in create widget and select the widget that we want. Match over menu, and we want to drag off of it and type add to viewport. You can plug all that in like you see here, and you will be good to go. We can now play the game, and you should get that widget popping up on the screen, and you should be able to navigate it as well. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and please consider checking out the Patreon and YouTube membership to support me further and get extra benefits along the way. If you had any issues with this tutorial or ran into any problems, please feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to get you set up and working again on your project. That is completely free. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, my friends.